Tonight, we embark on a sacred journey into the heart of rest itself. This is not a destination you must reach through effort or struggle. This is a homecoming to the peaceful sanctuary that has existed within you since before you learned words, before you formed thoughts, before you knew yourself as separate from the infinite wholeness of existence. As you settle into this space, allow yourself to feel the simple miracle of this moment. You are here, breathing, alive, and open to receiving ancient wisdom that has guided countless souls toward the peace that surpasses all understanding. Before we begin this journey together, I invite you to share something with our community. Take a moment to comment below about where you are in the world right now and what time it is as you listen to these words. Are you nestled in bed as midnight approaches? Are you watching the sunset from across the ocean? Perhaps it's early morning where you are, and you're seeking a moment of calm before the day unfolds. Wherever you are, whatever time your clock shows, you are part of a global community of seekers, all drawing from the same well of timeless wisdom. Your presence here matters. Your journey toward peace ripples outward, touching lives you may never know. There is something profoundly beautiful about knowing that as you rest here, someone on the other side of the world is also breathing deeply, also releasing the weight of their day, also opening their heart to these teachings. We are all walking each other home, as the poet says. So please, take a moment now. Share your time and your location. Let us know you're here. This simple act of connection reminds us that we are never truly alone on this path toward peace. And also, if these teachings resonate with your heart, please subscribe to Mindful Temple to join our global family and stay connected on this path. The Nature of Stillness. The wisdom traditions of the East have understood something for thousands of years that our modern world is only beginning to remember. Peace is not something we create through achievement or acquisition. Peace is not a prize we win by being good enough, smart enough, or spiritual enough. Peace is our natural state. Like the still depths of the ocean that remain calm even when storms rage on the surface. Our work is not to manufacture peace, but to remove the obstacles that prevent us from recognizing the peace that has always been present. Imagine for a moment a mountain lake at dawn. Before the wind begins to blow, before animals come to drink, before the day's activity disturbs its surface, the lake is perfectly still. In that stillness, it reflects the sky, the surrounding peaks, the early stars fading into morning light with flawless clarity. The lake doesn't try to be still. Stillness is simply what remains when there is no agitation. Your mind, your heart, your deepest self, these are like that mountain lake. The clarity and peace you seek are not things you must create. They are what naturally emerge when the winds of worry, the currents of craving, and the waves of resistance finally settle. But here is what the ancient teachers understood that brings such relief to weary hearts. You don't have to force the stillness. You don't have to wrestle your thoughts into submission or berate yourself for every ripple of emotion that crosses your awareness. The lake doesn't become still by fighting against the wind. It becomes still by allowing the wind to pass. In the same way, your peace emerges not through struggle, but through a gentle, patient allowing. Each breath you take is an invitation to this allowing. Each moment of rest is practice for recognizing the stillness that exists beneath all the surface turbulence of daily life. The Zen masters speak of this as just sitting, not sitting to achieve something, not meditating to become enlightened, but simply sitting with the wholehearted presence that allows life to be exactly as it is. In this radical acceptance, something miraculous happens. The things we've been fighting against, the thoughts we've been trying to push away, the feelings we've been resisting, they begin to settle naturally, like silt drifting to the bottom of a jar of water that's been shaken and then left undisturbed. You are that jar of water. This time of rest is your opportunity to stop shaking, to simply be, and to watch as clarity emerges all on its own. There is a teaching in Buddhism about the difference between two types of suffering. The first type is the suffering that life naturally brings, the challenges, losses, disappointments, and pains that are simply part of being human. This suffering is like the weather. Sometimes it rains, sometimes storms come. We cannot prevent this entirely. But there is a second type of suffering, and this is the suffering we add on top of the first through our resistance, our judgments, our stories about how things should be different. This is like standing in the rain and spending all our energy being angry that it's raining, wishing it would stop, cursing the sky, and making ourselves miserable with our resistance. The rain is the same either way, but our experience of it transforms entirely when we stop adding our mental and emotional struggle to the simple fact of wetness. As you rest here tonight, you are practicing the art of experiencing life without that second layer of suffering. The thoughts that arise, let them arise. The emotions that flow through, let them flow. The sensations in your body, whether comfort or discomfort, let them be exactly as they are. This is not passivity or resignation. This is the deepest form of wisdom, the recognition that fighting against what is already happening only exhausts us without changing anything. When we stop fighting, we discover reserves of energy we didn't know we had. When we stop resisting our experience, we find that our experience becomes much more workable, much less overwhelming. The ancient teachers would sometimes use the metaphor of a finger pointing at the moon. The finger is useful. It shows us where to look. But if we become obsessed with the finger, if we study it and analyze it and argue about whether it's the right kind of finger, we miss the moon entirely. So many of our spiritual practices, our techniques and methods and systems are like that pointing finger. They're useful guides, but they're not the destination. The peace we seek is the moon, vast and luminous, already present in the sky of our awareness. We don't need to create it or earn it or achieve it. We simply need to stop staring at our techniques long enough to look up and see what's been shining there all along. This is why these stories you'll hear tonight are not instructions to follow or lessons to memorize. They are more like windows that open onto vistas you've always had access to, but perhaps haven't noticed. They are invitations to recognize something you already know in the deepest part of yourself, something that goes beyond words and concepts, something that can only be experienced directly. As each story unfolds, don't worry about understanding everything or remembering all the details. Let the stories wash over you like gentle waves, carrying you deeper into rest, deeper into the recognition of your own peaceful nature. Your breath right now is the most perfect teacher you could ask for. Notice how it comes and goes without your effort. You don't have to remember to breathe. You don't have to achieve each inhalation or earn each exhalation. Your breath breathes itself. And in this simple natural rhythm, we find a mirror of how life wants to move through us when we stop trying to control everything. Breathing in, you receive. Breathing out, you release. This is the fundamental rhythm of existence, receiving and releasing, opening and letting go. In this rhythm, there is no struggle, only flow. Let your breathing be your anchor throughout this journey, a constant reminder that the most essential things happen without effort, without strain, without the need for your anxious oversight. Stories of acceptance through nature. In the mountainous regions of ancient Japan, there lived a master gardener named Takumi, who had devoted 40 years to creating what many considered the most beautiful garden in the entire province. His garden was not merely a collection of plants and stones. It was a living meditation, a three-dimensional poem that changed with the seasons and spoke to something deep in the soul of everyone who walked its winding paths. Takumi had studied with the greatest garden masters of his time. He understood the subtle principles of borrowed scenery, the importance of empty space, the art of suggesting vast landscapes within intimate enclosures. Every tree was positioned to create perfect balance. Every stone was evoked the essence of mountains reflected in miniature. Water features were designed to produce sounds that calmed the mind and opened the heart. But Takumi had a problem that troubled him more with each passing year. On the western edge of his garden stood 3 massive pine trees that had been growing there long before he acquired the land. These ancient trees were wild and untamed, their branches spreading in chaotic directions that violated every principle of refined garden design. Their roots had buckled the carefully laid stone pathways. Their shade prevented the delicate moss gardens beneath them from thriving in the way Takumi had planned. Their presence dominated the western vista, drawing the eye away from the more refined compositions he had labored to create. For years, Takumi had tried various strategies to bring these wild pines under control. He attempted to prune them into more acceptable shapes, but they seemed to resist his efforts, sending out new growth in even more unruly directions. He considered removing them entirely and replacing them with younger, more pliable trees that could be trained properly. But something always stopped him at the last moment. Perhaps it was the knowledge that these trees had been witnesses to the land for over 2 centuries. Perhaps it was a lingering superstition about disturbing such ancient beings. Whatever the reason, the trees remained, and they remained a source of frustration in what was otherwise his masterwork. One autumn day, a renowned Zen master from Kyoto came to visit the garden. Master Soren was known throughout the region for his deep insight and his ability to see truth hidden beneath surface appearances. Takumi felt both honored and nervous about this visit. He worried that this great teacher would immediately notice the glaring imperfection represented by the wild pines and would judge his garden accordingly. As they walked the paths together, Takumi anxiously pointed out his finest achievements: the moss garden that took 20 years to establish, the rock composition that suggested towering mountains, the carefully pruned azaleas that created waves of color each spring. Master Soren appreciated each of these accomplishments with genuine warmth, but Takumi noticed that the teacher's attention kept returning to the 3 wild pines. Finally, they stood together in the western section of the garden, directly beneath the largest of the unruly trees. Takumi couldn't contain his embarrassment any longer. "Master Soren," he said, his voice heavy with apology, "I must confess that these 3 pines are the great failure of my garden. For 40 years I have tried to bring them into harmony with my design, but they resist all my efforts. They are too wild, too chaotic. They destroy the refined aesthetic I have worked so hard to create. I should have removed them decades ago, but I could never quite bring myself to do it. Now I feel it's too late. They've become too large to remove without destroying much of the surrounding garden." Master Soren looked up into the tangled branches with an expression that Takumi couldn't quite read. The old teacher was silent for a long time, simply observing the trees with complete attention. Then, to Takumi's surprise, a smile began to spread across the master's face. "My friend," Soren said softly, "I have visited many famous gardens in my travels. I have seen works of exquisite refinement that demonstrated perfect mastery of design principles. But in all my years, I have rarely encountered anything as profound as what these 3 pines are teaching." Takumi felt confused. What could these wild, uncontrolled trees possibly teach that was more valuable than refined technique and careful design? Master Soren gestured toward the carefully manicured sections of the garden they had just walked through. "In those areas," he explained, "I see human wisdom, human effort, and human vision expressed beautifully. Your skill and dedication are evident in every stone placement, every pruned branch, every raked pattern in the gravel. But here, beneath these ancient pines, I encounter something that human effort alone can never create. Here, I meet the wildness that exists before and beyond all our attempts to control and refine. These trees are not separate from your garden. They are the heart of it, the reminder that beneath all our careful arrangements, nature follows its own wisdom, a wisdom deeper than any human design." The master walked slowly around the base of the largest pine, his weathered hand occasionally reaching out to touch the rough bark with obvious affection. "Look at how these roots have broken your perfect pathways," he said. "To you, this appears as destruction of your plan. But what if it's actually the earth teaching you about the limits of rigid planning? What if these buckled stones are more honest, more real than all your carefully level pathways? They speak the truth that the earth is alive, that roots will grow, that nothing remains exactly as we design it. This is not a failure. This is wisdom literally breaking through the surface of your assumptions." Takumi stood quietly, feeling something shift in his perception. For 40 years, he had seen these trees as obstacles to perfection. But as Master Soren spoke, he began to see them as teachers he had been too stubborn to learn from. The master continued, "In Zen practice, we speak of 2 types of beauty. There is the beauty of intention, where human creativity and skill combine to create something refined and harmonious. Your garden demonstrates this type of beauty masterfully. But there is also the beauty of suchness, the beauty of things being exactly what they are without human interference or improvement. These pines embody this second type of beauty. They have never tried to be beautiful in the way humans define beauty. They have simply grown according to their nature, responding to wind and weather, to the quality of soil, to their own inner pattern of unfolding." The old teacher looked directly at Takumi with eyes full of compassion. "The greatest gardens I have encountered are those that hold both types of beauty in balance, the refined and the wild, the controlled and the spontaneous, the human vision and the natural chaos. Your garden already possesses this balance, but you have been fighting against it instead of celebrating it. You have been trying to make the wild pines fit into your vision of refinement, when their greatest gift is to shatter that vision and remind you of something larger." Master Soren placed a gentle hand on Takumi's shoulder. "I suggest you spend time here each day for the next month, not planning how to control these trees, but simply sitting with them. Let them teach you what they know about growing without self-consciousness, about reaching towards light without anxiety, about shedding what is no longer needed without regret. Let them show you how nature creates beauty through process rather than through predetermined design." Takumi agreed to this practice, though he wasn't entirely sure what he was supposed to learn. Every morning for the next 30 days, he came to sit on a stone beneath the wild pines. At first, his mind continued its familiar patterns of criticism and planning. He would notice a branch growing in an awkward direction and immediately begin calculating how it might be pruned. He would see the buckled pathway and start designing repairs. But gradually, as the days passed, something began to change. He started to notice things he had never seen before, how the uneven branches created constantly changing patterns of light and shadow, patterns more dynamic and alive than any he could have planned. He observed how birds preferred these wild trees over his more refined specimens, building nests in the chaotic tangle of branches where they felt hidden and safe. He noticed how the buckled stones in the pathway had created small pools where rain collected, and how these pools reflected the sky in ways that his level pathways never could. One morning, about 3 weeks into his practice, Takumi arrived to find that a storm during the night had broken off one of the large lower branches. It lay across the pathway, its needles still green, its form still graceful despite being severed from the tree. Takumi's first impulse was to call his assistants to remove this debris immediately, but something made him pause. He looked at the fallen branch, really looked at it, perhaps for 40 years of walking past it daily. The wood was weathered and textured in ways that revealed its age. The patterns of growth rings told a story of decades, of dry years and wet years, of gradual expansion responding to light and water and soil. This branch had been reaching toward the southern sun longer than Takumi had been alive.
And now it had completed its journey. Its falling was not a failure or a problem. It was simply the next chapter in an ongoing story of growth and decay, of form and dissolution. Instead of removing the branch, Takumi decided to leave it where it had fallen. He incorporated it into the garden as it lay, allowing moss to gradually cover it, watching as insects began to make homes in its slowly decomposing wood. The branch became a teaching about impermanence, about how beauty transforms but doesn't disappear, about how death feeds new life. Visitors to the garden began to notice this unusual feature, a large branch left to decay naturally in an otherwise immaculately maintained space. Some questioned whether the gardener was becoming careless in his old age, but others, those with eyes to see, recognized it as a profound teaching, an invitation to accept the natural cycles of growth and decay that no amount of human control can prevent. By the end of the 30 days, Takumi's relationship with the wild pines had completely transformed. He no longer saw them as flaws in his garden, but as its living heart, the element that prevented the entire space from becoming too precious, too controlled, too far removed from the wild truth of nature itself. He began to adjust his gardening practices throughout the entire property, allowing certain areas to grow more freely, permitting unexpected volunteers to remain if they added something vital to the composition. His garden became known not just for its refined beauty, but for its wisdom, for the way it held refinement and wildness in a dance that felt both planned and spontaneous, both human and natural. Years later, when students came to learn gardening from Takumi, he would always bring them first to stand beneath the 3 wild pines. Here, he would tell them, is where I learned the most important lesson of my life. I learned that acceptance is not the same as resignation. Accepting these trees didn't mean giving up on creating beauty. It meant expanding my definition of beauty to include what I couldn't control. It meant recognizing that my vision, no matter how refined, was still limited by my human perspective. Nature has visions that extend beyond what any individual mind can conceive. When we learn to work with those larger patterns instead of fighting against them, we become partners in creation rather than tyrants trying to impose our will. This teaching about acceptance runs like a deep river through all of Buddhist wisdom. We suffer not primarily because difficult things happen, but because we resist what is already happening. We exhaust ourselves fighting battles that have already been decided, trying to change what has already occurred, wishing that reality were different than it is. The wild pines in Takumi's garden were going to grow however they grew, regardless of his preferences. His resistance to their nature didn't change the trees, it only changed his experience, turning what could have been a source of wonder into a source of frustration. When he finally stopped fighting and started accepting, the trees didn't change, but everything else did. His perception transformed. His relationship to his work deepened. His garden became more alive, more true, more capable of touching people's hearts. As you rest here now, feel into this teaching about acceptance. Notice any places in your life where you might be like Takumi before his awakening, fighting against something that simply is, exhausting yourself trying to control what cannot be controlled, missing the gifts that are present because you're too focused on the flaws. What would it feel like to bring the same quality of acceptance to those situations that Takumi learned to bring to his wild pines? Not giving up, not becoming passive, but expanding your vision to include what you cannot change, finding the wisdom hidden in what you've been resisting. The practice of deep listening.
In a remote valley where few travelers ventured, there lived a woman named Ayame who had been born deaf. From her earliest childhood, she had navigated a world of silence, learning to read lips, to communicate through signs, to sense vibrations that told her stories her ears could not hear. The villagers who knew Ayame often remarked on her extraordinary perceptiveness. She seemed to know things about people that others missed, to understand emotions that went unspoken, to perceive truths that hid beneath the surface of words. When Ayame was in her 30s, a small Buddhist temple was established in her valley. The monk who came to lead this temple, Master Kensho, was known for his Dharma talks that drew people from distant regions. His words were said to be like rain falling on parched earth, bringing life and understanding to those who heard them. The villagers would gather each week to listen to his teachings, and they would return home transformed, speaking excitedly about the insights he had shared. Ayame was happy for her neighbors, but she felt a familiar sadness. Once again, there was something valuable in the world that her deafness prevented her from accessing. She could not hear Master Kensho's renowned words, could not benefit from the wisdom that so moved her hearing neighbors. One day, several village women approached Ayame with an idea. "We have been learning some basic signs," they told her, "so that we can share Master Kensho's teachings with you after each talk. It won't be perfect, and we'll surely miss some nuances, but at least you'll have access to the basic content of his Dharma talks." Ayame was deeply moved by their kindness and agreed to this arrangement. Each week, after Master Kensho finished teaching, a group of women would gather at Ayame's house and do their best to convey what they had heard, using the simple signs they had learned combined with written notes and drawings. But something unexpected began to happen. As the weeks passed, the women noticed that Ayame's questions and reflections about the teachings were often deeper and more insightful than their own. She would pick up on implications and meanings that they had completely missed, even though they had heard the talks directly while she had only received simplified translations. "How is this possible?" they asked each other. "She's getting second-hand information filtered through our limited ability to sign, and yet she seems to understand the teachings more profoundly than we do." One of the women, a bold soul named Hana, decided to ask Master Kensho about this mystery. After one of his talks, she approached him and explained the situation. "Master," she said, "we have been sharing your teachings with our friend Ayame, who is deaf, but we have noticed something strange. Even though she cannot hear your actual words, even though she receives only our clumsy summaries, she seems to grasp the heart of your teachings more deeply than those of us who hear you directly. How is this possible?" Master Kensho smiled with obvious delight. "I would very much like to meet this Ayame," he said. "Would you arrange for her to visit me?" When Ayame came to the temple, Master Kensho greeted her with a bow and invited her to sit with him in the garden. Through Hana, who had come along to facilitate communication, he asked Ayame to share her understanding of the most recent teaching, which had been about the nature of emptiness. Ayame thought for a moment, then began to sign her response. Hana translated, "Ayame says that when you speak about emptiness, she understands it not as a concept, but as a direct experience. She says that in the silence she lives within, there is a quality of spaciousness that she thinks might be similar to what you call emptiness. It's not that nothing exists, it's that everything exists without the solid, fixed nature that we usually assume things have. In silence, things reveal themselves as more fluid, more interconnected, more mysterious than they appear when we're distracted by the constant commentary of sound." Master Kensho listened to this translation with growing amazement. Then he asked another question. "What is your experience when you observe people who are talking but whose words you cannot hear?" Ayame's hands moved gracefully as she responded, and Hana translated, "I see things that the speakers themselves often don't notice. I see the gap between what their mouths say and what their bodies express. I see the emotions that their words try to hide. I see when someone speaks from their head, but their heart is elsewhere. I see how people are together in space, but often absent from true connection with each other. Everyone speaking, but very few truly listening. Without the distraction of words, I can see the deeper conversation that's always happening beneath language, the truth that flows through gesture and presence and energy." The master nodded slowly, a look of deep respect on his face. He turned to Hana and said to Ayame, "Please tell Ayame that she has been my teacher today." Then, speaking through Hana so that Ayame would receive his words, he said, "You have shown me something I needed to remember. I have been proud of my ability to express Dharma through words, to craft teachings that touch people's minds. But you have reminded me that the deepest truth cannot be conveyed through words at all. Words can point toward truth, but they can also distract from it. Someone who listens with their whole being, as you do, often receives more than someone who only listens with their ears." Master Kensho thought for a moment, then made an unusual request. He asked if Ayame would be willing to sit in on his weekly Dharma talks, even though she couldn't hear them. "I want you to observe," he explained through Hana. "I want you to watch the people who come to hear me teach. Then, afterward, I would like you to tell me what you saw. Not what you think I said, but what you observed in the people who were listening." Ayame agreed, touched by the master's trust and curious about what she might discover. The following week, Ayame sat at the back of the temple hall while Master Kensho gave his teaching. She watched the assembled villagers as they listened to words she could not hear. Some sat with complete attention, their bodies still,
They're breathing deep, their faces showing the reflection of inner understanding. But many others, she noticed, seemed to be present in body only. Their eyes would drift around the room, their fingers would fidget, their bodies would shift restlessly. They appeared to be listening, but something in their quality of presence suggested that their minds were elsewhere, perhaps planning tomorrow's tasks or rehashing yesterday's conversations, while the master's words flowed past them like water around stones. After the talk, Ayame met with Master Kensho and shared her observations. Through Hana's translation, she told him, "Many people come to hear you, but I'm not sure how many truly listen. They seem to be waiting for something, perhaps for words that match what they already think, or for teachings that confirm their existing views. When you say something that challenges them, I can see their bodies close, even while they continue nodding as if in agreement. It's as if they hear your voice, but receive only what they're prepared to receive, filtering everything else out." Master Kensho received this feedback with humility. "You have revealed something important," he said. "I have been focused on what I'm teaching, but I have not paid enough attention to how people are listening. Speaking and listening are partners in the transmission of Dharma. Even the most profound teaching falls on deaf ears, no pun intended, if the listener is not truly present and open." He paused, then asked Ayame if she would be willing to sit in on his weekly Dharma talks, even though she couldn't hear them. "I want you to observe," he explained through Hana. "I want you to watch the people who come to hear me teach. Then, afterward, I would like you to tell me what you saw. Not what you think I said, but what you observed in the people who were listening." Ayame agreed, touched by the master's trust and curious about what she might discover. The following week, Ayame sat at the back of the temple hall while Master Kensho gave his teaching. She watched the assembled villagers as they listened to words she could not hear. Some sat with complete attention, their bodies still, their breathing deep, their faces showing the reflection of inner understanding. But many others, she noticed, seemed to be present in body only. Their eyes would drift around the room, their fingers would fidget, their bodies would shift restlessly. They appeared to be listening, but something in their quality of presence suggested that their minds were elsewhere, perhaps planning tomorrow's tasks or rehashing yesterday's conversations, while the master's words flowed past them like water around stones.
After the talk, Ayame met with Master Kensho and shared her observations. Through Hana's translation, she told him, "Many people come to hear you, but I'm not sure how many truly listen. They seem to be waiting for something, perhaps for words that match what they already think, or for teachings that confirm their existing views. When you say something that challenges them, I can see their bodies close, even while they continue nodding as if in agreement. It's as if they hear your voice, but receive only what they're prepared to receive, filtering everything else out." Master Kensho received this feedback with humility. "You have revealed something important," he said. "I have been focused on what I'm teaching, but I have not paid enough attention to how people are listening. Speaking and listening are partners in the transmission of Dharma. Even the most profound teaching falls on deaf ears, no pun intended, if the listener is not truly present and open." He paused, then asked Ayame, "Would you be willing to teach a class on listening? You have mastered an art that most hearing people never develop. We would all benefit from learning what you know." And so, in one of those beautiful inversions that often occur in spiritual communities, Ayame became a teacher at the temple. Once a month, she would lead a session on what she called listening with the whole being.
She taught people to observe not just words, but the space between words. She guided them in noticing body language, energy, and presence. She helped them understand that much of what matters in communication happens beneath and beyond the level of words. Most importantly, she taught them about the quality of silence, the open, receptive awareness that makes true hearing possible. Ayame would have participants practice sitting in silence together, not the silence of not speaking, but the deeper silence of not constantly narrating their experience to themselves. She taught them to notice how the mind wants to fill every moment with commentary, judgment, planning, and analysis, and how this internal noise drowns out the subtle truths that can only be perceived in stillness. Through these practices, many villagers discovered that they had been going through life somewhat deaf themselves, not because their ears didn't work, but because they had never learned to truly listen. They were so busy with their own thoughts and reactions that they rarely gave their full attention to anything outside their own mental chatter. One of Ayame's most devoted students was a young man named Isamu, who had always considered himself a good listener because people often came to him with their problems. But through Ayame's teaching, he realized that his version of listening involved a lot of internal activity, immediately formulating advice, comparing the other person's situation to his own experiences, and judging whether their feelings were reasonable. This kind of listening, Ayame helped him see, was actually a subtle form of self-involvement disguised as care for others. Ayame taught Isamu and the others a different kind of listening, one that she had been forced to develop through her deafness. This listening involved setting aside your own agenda completely, creating a space of open receptivity where the other person could be truly met and seen. It meant resisting the urge to immediately solve, fix, or change what you were hearing, and instead simply bearing witness to another's experience with compassionate presence. When Isamu began practicing this kind of listening in his relationships, he was amazed at how it deepened his connections with others. People began to share more honestly with him. Conversations became more meaningful. He found that often the greatest gift he could offer was not his advice or solutions, but simply his undivided attention. Through her work at the temple, Ayame also helped people understand something profound about spiritual practice itself. Buddhism speaks often about meditation as a practice of listening deeply, not to external sounds, but to the truth of your own being and to the nature of reality itself. But how can you hear this inner truth if your mind is constantly full of noise? How can you perceive the subtle teachings that arise from direct experience if you're too busy thinking about experience to actually experience it? Ayame's deafness had given her a natural predisposition toward the kind of inner silence that most meditators spend years trying to cultivate. Without the constant input of sound, her awareness had learned to rest in a more spacious, open quality of attention. This wasn't to say that deafness automatically conferred spiritual realization, but it had given Ayame a particular insight into the nature of listening that went beyond the physical sense of hearing. Master Kensho would often say that Ayame had taught him to distinguish between hearing and listening. Hearing is passive, the mere physical reception of sound waves, but listening is active, a whole being participation in the act of understanding. You can hear words all day long and never really listen to any of them. Conversely, as Ayame demonstrated, you can be deaf to sound, but supremely skilled at listening to truth. The Buddhist teachings emphasize again and again the importance of direct perception, of seeing things as they actually are, rather than through the filter of our concepts and conditioning. But we cannot perceive clearly if we're not truly listening, and we cannot truly listen if we cannot find the silence beneath our mental noise. As you rest here now, feel into this teaching about listening. Notice the quality of your own inner listening. Is your mind full of commentary about these words as you hear them? Are you judging, analyzing, agreeing, or disagreeing? Or can you find a more spacious way of receiving, where understanding arises naturally without the need for constant mental processing? This is the art that Ayame mastered and shared, the art of listening not just with ears, but with your entire being. When you bring this quality of listening to your own life, to the people around you, to the subtle whispers of your own deepest wisdom, everything begins to shift. You discover that truth has been speaking to you all along. You were just too busy with mental noise to hear it. The deep rest that these teachings offer comes partly from learning to listen in this wholehearted way, from creating inner silence that allows reality to reveal itself without our constant interference. When you stop talking to yourself about your experience and start simply experiencing, when you stop narrating your life and start living it, you find a peace that's been waiting patiently for you to quiet down enough to notice it. This is the gift that Ayame brought to her community, the reminder that the most important listening happens in silence, and that the deepest truths are often found not in the noise of words, but in the spacious awareness that holds all words, all sounds, all experiences in its vast, accommodating embrace.
Wisdom in simplicity. In the countryside outside a bustling city, there lived a potter named Hiroshi who had inherited his craft from a long line of artisans. His family had been making pottery for 7 generations, and the techniques had been passed down with careful attention to tradition. Hiroshi's workshop was filled with specialized tools, each one designed for a specific purpose. He had trimming tools of various sizes, glazing brushes of different widths, stamps and molds for creating decorative patterns, and dozens of other implements that his ancestors had accumulated over the centuries. His shelves held notebooks full of glaze recipes, each one tested and refined over years of experimentation. His kiln was a complex structure that required precise knowledge to operate effectively. Despite all this accumulated knowledge and equipment, Hiroshi felt increasingly burdened by his craft. Each piece he made required him to remember countless technical details, to follow elaborate procedures, to avoid dozens of potential mistakes. The joy that had initially drawn him to pottery was gradually being smothered by the weight of complexity. He began to dread going to his workshop, though he couldn't quite understand why. He had everything he needed, more than enough knowledge and tools, yet the work felt heavy rather than inspired. One day, a wandering monk stopped at Hiroshi's village. This monk, whose name was Enkyo, had very few possessions, just a simple robe, a begging bowl, and a walking staff. When word spread through the village that an accomplished monk was visiting, people invited him to share meals and teachings. Hiroshi attended one of these gatherings and was struck by something about Enkyo's presence. Despite owning almost nothing, despite having no home or security, the monk radiated a quality of ease and contentment that Hiroshi had rarely encountered. How could someone with so little be so peaceful, while he, surrounded by abundance, felt so burdened? After the gathering, Hiroshi approached Enkyo and asked if he might visit the potter's workshop. The monk agreed, and the next morning, Hiroshi showed him around his extensive facility. He demonstrated the various tools, explained the complex glaze formulas, and described the intricate firing processes he had mastered. Enkyo listened with genuine interest, occasionally asking questions that revealed an intelligent curiosity about the craft. When the tour was complete, Hiroshi asked the monk what he thought. Enkyo was quiet for a long time, walking slowly around the workshop, observing with that quality of complete attention that comes from a mind not cluttered with constant judgment. Finally, the monk spoke. "You have impressive knowledge and beautiful tools," he said. "But may I ask you something? When you make a pot, what is its essential nature? What makes it truly a pot?" Hiroshi thought this was a strange question with an obvious answer. "A pot is shaped clay that has been fired," he said. "It's useful for holding things, for storing water or grain or tea." Enkyo nodded. "So the essence of a pot is its usefulness, its ability to hold and contain. Now let me ask you this. Do you need all these tools and techniques to create something that can hold and contain?" The question struck Hiroshi in an unexpected way. Technically, he realized, the answer was no. The earliest potters, working thousands of years ago with none of his sophisticated equipment or knowledge, had created vessels that served their purpose beautifully. "But surely," he protested, "all my accumulated knowledge allows me to make better pots than those ancient artisans could make." "Better in what way?" the monk asked gently. "More technically perfect? More uniform? More decorated? Or more able to hold water?" Hiroshi had to admit that a simple bowl made by a prehistoric potter, if it could hold water without leaking, was not functionally inferior to his most elaborately crafted piece. Enkyo smiled with compassion. "I'm not suggesting that your knowledge and skills are worthless, but I wonder if they have become a barrier between you and the simple joy of working with clay. You have added so many layers of complexity to your craft that you can no longer touch its essential nature." The monk picked up a lump of clay from Hiroshi's work table and began to form it with his hands. He had no formal training in pottery, but his movements were natural and unself-conscious. Within a few minutes, he had created a small, rough bowl. It was uneven and imperfect by any technical standard, but there was something alive about it, something honest and present. "This bowl will never win prizes," Enkyo said, "but it will hold water, and more importantly, making it brought me simple joy. I wasn't worried about whether I was doing it right or whether it matched some standard of perfection. I was just playing with mud, enjoying the feeling of clay shaping itself in my hands." Hiroshi looked at his own workshop with new eyes. All his tools and techniques, accumulated over generations, were meant to serve the simple act of forming clay into useful shapes. But somewhere along the way, the servants had become masters. He had become so focused on complex procedures and technical perfection that he had forgotten the basic pleasure of working with earth and fire. That day marked a turning point in Hiroshi's relationship with his craft. He didn't abandon his knowledge or discard his tools. That would have been another form of extremism. Instead, he began to simplify his approach, letting go of unnecessary complexity, returning to more direct and intuitive ways of working. He started each day not by reviewing his elaborate plans and procedures, but simply sitting with clay, feeling its texture, allowing his hands to remember what they knew before his mind had cluttered everything with techniques and rules. The change in his work was remarkable. His pieces became less technically perfect, but more alive. There was a vitality and spontaneity to them that his more controlled work had lacked. Customers responded to this new quality with enthusiasm. They might not have been able to articulate exactly what was different, but they could feel that these pots had been made with more joy, more presence, more connection to the essential nature of the craft.
Hiroshi also began teaching pottery classes in his village, but his teaching method was unusual. Instead of starting students with all the technical knowledge he had accumulated, he would simply give them clay and encourage them to play with it. Only after they had experienced the joy of directly engaging with the material would he gradually introduce techniques, and then only as tools to help them accomplish what they were naturally trying to do, not as rules they must follow to do things correctly. One of his students was a young woman named Yui, who came from a wealthy family and had received extensive education in various arts. She expected Hiroshi's class to be like her other lessons, structured around learning proper techniques and achieving measurable progress. But Hiroshi's approach frustrated her at first. She wanted to know the right way to do things, and he kept telling her to just explore and see what happened. Isn't there a correct method? Shouldn't I be learning the traditional techniques? Hiroshi would smile and say, "First, learn to love the clay. Fall in love with the simple magic of wet earth taking shape in your hands. Once you have that love, techniques will serve you. But if you learn techniques without first discovering love, you will make correct pots that are nonetheless dead." Gradually, Yui began to understand what her teacher was pointing toward. She noticed that the times she enjoyed class most were not when she successfully executed a technique, but when she forgot about doing things right and simply got lost in the meditative pleasure of working with clay. She discovered that her best pieces came not from careful planning, but from moments of unself-conscious flow, when her hands seemed to know what to do without her mental mind's interference. This lesson extended far beyond pottery for Yui. She began to notice how much of her life was governed by trying to do things correctly, according to external standards, rather than engaging genuinely with her own direct experience. She had been educated to value complexity and sophistication, to believe that the more knowledge she accumulated, the better her life would be. But through working with clay in Hiroshi's simple studio, she discovered that sometimes the most profound experiences come from the most basic engagements, when we strip away all the elaborate structures we've built and meet life directly with open hands and an uncluttered heart. This teaching about simplicity runs deep in Buddhist wisdom. The Buddha himself spent years studying with the most learned teachers of his time, mastering complex meditation techniques and philosophical systems. But his enlightenment came not through adding more knowledge, but through letting go of all his elaborate mental constructions and simply sitting with reality as it is. The famous story tells how he sat beneath the Bodhi tree and resolved not to move until he understood the truth of suffering and its end. What he discovered was not a complex philosophical system, but something remarkably simple: that suffering arises from our wanting things to be different than they are, and liberation comes from seeing clearly how this process works and releasing our grip on our preferences and aversions.
The entire edifice of Buddhist teaching, with all its elaborate philosophies and practices, is ultimately pointing back toward this simple recognition. We don't need to add anything to ourselves to be free. We need to subtract, to let go of the accumulated layers of conditioning, concept, and complication that obscure our natural clarity and peace. This is why Zen masters sometimes speak of Buddhism as nothing special. Not because it's valueless, but because the truth it points toward is not some extraordinary attainment, but simply a clear seeing of what is already so. Like Hiroshi discovering that the most essential thing about pottery is the simple act of shaping clay, we discover that the most essential thing about spiritual practice is learning to be present with life as it unfolds, without constantly adding our layers of judgment, resistance, and mental elaboration. As you rest here now,
Feel how this teaching about simplicity creates a sense of relief, like setting down a heavy backpack you've been carrying up a mountain. You don't need to accumulate more knowledge, more techniques, more spiritual accomplishments to be fundamentally okay. The peace you seek is not hidden at the end of some complex path requiring years of specialized training. It's available right now in the simple, direct experience of breathing, of being aware, of allowing this moment to be exactly as it is. This doesn't mean that learning and growth are valueless, any more than Hiroshi's accumulated knowledge was valueless. But it means recognizing that these things are servants to the essential simplicity of just being, not masters that we must please before we're allowed to rest. The art of non-striving.
On a small island where fishing was the primary livelihood, there lived a young man named Kaito who had always been the most ambitious person in his village. From his earliest childhood, he had pushed himself to be the best at everything he tried. He would practice tying fishing knots until his fingers bled. He would study the movements of fish and ocean currents with scientific precision. He would wake hours before the other fishermen to get the best position on the water. His dedication paid off in many ways. By the time he was 25, Kaito owned 3 boats and employed several other fishermen. He had the largest house in the village and married the most beautiful woman anyone could remember. By external measures, he was extraordinarily successful. Other young men looked up to him as a model of what hard work and determination could achieve. But Kaito had a secret that he shared with no one. Despite all his success, he was miserable. His accomplishments brought him no real satisfaction. Each goal he achieved felt empty almost as soon as he attained it, and he would immediately shift his focus to the next target. He couldn't enjoy a meal because he was planning tomorrow's work. He couldn't rest because he felt he should be using every moment productively. He couldn't appreciate his wife's love because he was too busy proving himself worthy through achievement. His mind was constantly racing, always pushing, never satisfied, never at peace. One evening, Kaito was walking along the beach, his mind churning with plans and worries as usual, when he came upon an old man sitting on a rock, fishing with a simple hand line. The old man looked familiar, and after a moment, Kaito recognized him as Saburo, a fisherman who had been active when Kaito was a child, but who had largely retired years ago. Kaito remembered Saburo as someone his younger self had not respected much. Saburo had never been particularly successful by conventional measures. He had never owned more than one small boat, had never accumulated wealth, had lived in the same modest cottage his entire life. In Kaito's value system, Saburo represented everything he was determined not to be: mediocre, unambitious, content with little. But something about Saburo's presence that evening caught Kaito's attention. The old man sat with a quality of ease that seemed almost luminous in the fading light. His movements as he tended his line were unhurried and natural, like water flowing around stones. His face wore an expression of simple contentment that Kaito had never seen in any mirror when he looked at his own reflection. Despite himself, Kaito found himself sitting down on a nearby rock watching the old fisherman. After a while, Saburo acknowledged him with a friendly nod. "Fine evening," the old man said. Kaito agreed, and they sat together in companionable silence for several minutes, something Kaito almost never experienced: silence without urgency, presence without agenda. Finally, Kaito's curiosity overcame his initial intention to just sit quietly. "Saburo," he said, "can I ask you something?" The old man smiled. "Of course." "You look happy. Kaito observed. I mean, really happy, not just putting on a pleasant face. How is that possible when you have so little? Sabuto's smile widened. So little? He said, gesturing to the ocean, the sky, the setting sun painting everything in shades of gold and crimson. I have all this. I have this evening, this exact quality of light that will never occur again. I have this breath I'm taking right now. I have the simple pleasure of sitting on this rock with fishing line in my hands. How much more do I need? Kaito felt a familiar impatience rising. But you never accomplished much, he said, more bluntly than he intended. You never built a successful business or made a name for yourself. Don't you have regrets about that? Sabuto reeled his line slightly, checking the bait with unhurried attention before responding. Regrets? Not really. I spent my life doing what I loved, fishing, being on the water, providing enough for my needs. I never wanted a big business because I saw how stressed the successful businessmen were. I never wanted a big reputation because I saw how much energy it took to maintain one. I wanted to wake up each morning looking forward to the day, and I wanted to go to sleep each night feeling grateful for what I had experienced. By those measures, I've been quite successful. The old man looked directly at Kaito. You have 3 boats, a big house, and more money than anyone in the village. But do you wake up happy? Do you go to sleep grateful? Kaito felt something crack inside him. No, he admitted quietly. I wake up anxious about all the things I need to accomplish. I go to sleep exhausted and already dreading tomorrow's pressures. Even when I achieve what I've been striving for, it brings me no real joy. I don't know what's wrong with me. Sabuto nodded with understanding. Nothing is wrong with you. You've just been operating under a mistaken assumption that achievement brings happiness, that success brings peace, that getting what you want will finally allow you to relax and enjoy life. The old fisherman cast his line out again with a graceful, practiced motion. I learned something years ago that changed everything. I learned that striving is endless. No matter how much you achieve, there's always another goal, another level, another thing to acquire or accomplish. If you make happiness dependent on achieving your goals, you will never be happy because the finish line keeps moving. But if you learn to find happiness in the process itself, in the simple, direct experience of whatever you're doing right now, then you're happy all the time, regardless of whether you're achieving some external goal. Kaito sat with these words, feeling their truth in a way that was almost painful. His entire life had been built around the idea that happiness was waiting for him at the end of effort, that once he achieved enough, accomplished enough, proved himself enough, then he could finally relax and be content. But that moment never came. Each achievement just raised the bar and created new pressures. Tell me how you do it, Kaito said, hearing a note of desperation in his own voice. How do you enjoy the process when there's so much that needs to be done, so many responsibilities and pressures? Sabuto was quiet for a moment, watching his line where it disappeared into the darkening water. I'll tell you what works for me, he said. When I'm fishing, I'm just fishing. I'm not fishing and planning tomorrow's work. I'm not fishing and worrying about money. I'm not fishing and wishing I were somewhere else. I'm completely here, feeling the line in my hands, watching the water, enjoying the rhythm of casting and reeling. When the process itself becomes the point, rather than a means to some future end, everything changes. The old man continued, and this applies to everything, not just fishing. When I'm eating, I'm completely present to the taste and texture of food. When I'm walking, I feel my feet on the ground and enjoy the movement of my body. When I'm talking with my wife, I'm fully there with her, not mentally absent while planning what I need to say next. This presence, this being fully here for whatever is happening, this is the art of non-striving.
You're still doing things, but you're not struggling against the present moment, always reaching for the future. Kaito felt something shift in him as he listened. It wasn't a dramatic transformation, but more like a door opening slightly, letting in air and light. That evening, sitting on the rocks with Sabuto, he had his first taste in years of simply being present without agenda, without constantly measuring himself against his goals, without the relentless pressure to be doing more, achieving more, becoming more. Over the following months, Kaito began making changes in his approach to life and work. He didn't sell his boats or give up his business. That would have been just another form of striving, trying to achieve non-striving through dramatic action. Instead, he started practicing presence in small ways throughout his day. When he was repairing nets, instead of rushing through the task while planning the next one, he would give his full attention to the work itself, finding unexpected satisfaction in the simple rhythm of mending. When he was on the water, instead of constantly calculating profits and efficiency, he would sometimes just stop and look around, really seeing the play of light on water, really feeling the movement of the boat, really appreciating the privilege of being alive in this exact moment. His wife noticed the change before he said anything to her. "You seem different," she observed one evening. "Softer somehow. More here." Kaito smiled and told her about his conversation with Sabuto and the practice he had been developing. "I'm learning to stop postponing my life. I used to think that I would be happy once I achieved enough success, but I'm beginning to understand that if I can't be happy with what I'm doing right now, I won't be happy with what I achieve in the future either."
Happiness isn't waiting at the end of effort. It's available in the effort itself. When I stop fighting against the present moment and just show up fully for what I'm doing. The paradox that Kaito discovered was that as he stopped striving so hard and started being more present, his work often became more effective. When he wasn't tense and anxious, he made better decisions. When he wasn't constantly pushing himself and his employees, the work environment became more pleasant and people actually became more productive. The quality of his life improved dramatically, not because his external circumstances changed much, but because his internal experience transformed. He learned the profound truth that the Buddha taught, that peace doesn't come from arranging life perfectly, but from learning to be at peace with life, however it arranges itself. This teaching about non-striving is one of the most counterintuitive aspects of Buddhist wisdom, especially in our modern world that constantly tells us to hustle, to grind, to never be satisfied, to always push for more. The term in Chinese Buddhism is wu wei, often translated as effortless action or non-doing, though both translations can be misleading. It doesn't mean being passive or lazy, it means acting in harmony with the natural flow of life, rather than constantly struggling against it. It means doing what needs to be done without the addition of excessive force, anxiety, or self-conscious striving. Like water that flows around obstacles rather than trying to push through them, we learn to accomplish our necessary tasks without the exhausting overlay of struggle and tension. The peace that comes from this understanding is profound because it doesn't depend on everything going your way. Kaito discovered that he could be at peace even when his fishing trips weren't maximally profitable, even when things didn't go according to plan, because his peace was rooted in his quality of presence rather than in his external achievements. This is the freedom that non-striving offers, liberation from the tyranny of constant goal-seeking and self-improvement, the discovery that you are already complete right now, and life is already worth fully participating in right now. not someday when everything is finally perfect. As you rest here, feel into this teaching. Notice any ways you might be striving even as you try to relax, perhaps trying to fall asleep perfectly or trying to get maximum benefit from these teachings. Can you let go of even that subtle effort and simply be here, breathing, listening, allowing whatever unfolds to unfold naturally? This is the practice, this gentle releasing into what is, this trust in the process itself rather than constant manipulation toward preferred outcomes.
Compassion as a path to rest.
In a mountain monastery where monks dedicated their lives to meditation and study, there was a young monk named Jiro who struggled with what he felt was his greatest weakness. Unlike some of his brothers who seemed naturally kind and patient, Jiro found himself frequently irritated by others' faults and failings. When someone made noise during meditation periods, Jiro would feel intense annoyance. When a fellow monk left shared spaces messy, Jiro would burn with silent resentment. When teachers spoke slowly or repeated themselves, Jiro's mind would scream with impatience. He was ashamed of these reactions because they seemed so contrary to the compassionate heart that Buddhism encouraged. He would watch other monks responding to these same situations with gentle kindness and wonder what was wrong with him that he couldn't do the same. Jiro tried various strategies to overcome what he saw as his character flaw. He would force himself to smile when he felt annoyed. He would recite compassion mantras when irritation arose. He would try to suppress his judgmental thoughts and replace them with kinder ones. But none of these approaches worked very well. Often he would successfully hide his irritation from others, but inside he felt like a pressure cooker, building up more and more steam that had to be vented somewhere. Occasionally, he would explode in ways that seemed disproportionate to the trigger, and then he would feel even more ashamed and redouble his efforts at forced kindness. It was an exhausting cycle that made his spiritual practice feel like a constant battle with his own nature. One day, the monastery received a visit from an elderly nun named Etsuko, who was renowned for her insight and her gift for working with difficult students. The abbot asked her to meet with several monks who were struggling with various aspects of their practice, and Jiro was among those called for private interviews. When Jiro entered the small room where Etsuko was receiving students, he was immediately struck by her presence. Despite her advanced age, she radiated a quality of vitality and warmth that seemed to fill the entire space. Her eyes were bright and kind, and her smile was utterly genuine. Jiro bowed respectfully and sat down, feeling nervous about revealing his struggles to this accomplished teacher. Etsuko began with a simple question. "Tell me, what brings you the most difficulty in your practice?" Jiro had prepared a somewhat sanitized version of his struggles, but something about the nun's open, accepting presence made him decide to be completely honest. "I am not a compassionate person," he said, the words tumbling out. "I try to be kind and patient like the other monks, but inside I'm full of judgment and irritation. I get annoyed at people for the smallest things. I know this is wrong. I know I should be more loving, but I can't seem to change no matter how hard I try. I'm afraid I'm not suited for this path because I don't have a naturally kind heart." Etsuko listened with complete attention, her expression neither shocked nor disapproving, just deeply interested. When Jiro finished his confession, she was quiet for a long moment before speaking. "Tell me," she said gently, "when these feelings of irritation and judgment arise, what do you do with them?" "I try to get rid of them," Jiro replied. I try to replace them with kinder thoughts. I tell myself I shouldn't feel this way. I recite compassion practices to try to change my reaction." The nun nodded slowly. "And how well does that work?" "Not well at all," Jiro admitted. "Often it makes things worse because then I'm annoyed at the other person and angry at myself for being annoyed. It's like I've doubled my suffering." Atsuko smiled with such warmth that Jiro felt some of his shame beginning to dissolve. "My dear friend," she said, "I'm going to tell you something that might surprise you. You are actually much closer to genuine compassion than many people who appear kind on the surface, but who have never honestly examined their own hearts." Jiro looked confused. "How can that be? I'm the least compassionate person in this monastery." The nun shook her head. "True compassion begins with honesty about your own experience. You have been honest about what you actually feel, rather than pretending to feel what you think you should feel. This honesty is the foundation. Many people who appear compassionate have simply learned to hide their judgment and irritation, even from themselves. But hidden poison is still poison. It leaks out in subtle ways, and it prevents genuine connection." She leaned forward slightly, her eyes kind but direct. "Now, I'm going to suggest something radical. For the next week, I want you to stop trying to get rid of your irritation and judgment. When these feelings arise, instead of fighting them or trying to replace them with better feelings, I want you to do something different. I want you to turn toward these difficult emotions with compassion." Jiro felt utterly confused. Turn toward them with compassion? But they're the problem. They're what's preventing me from being compassionate towards others. Atsuko smiled at his confusion. "This is the teaching I want you to discover directly through practice, rather than just accepting my words. But I'll give you a hint. You will never learn real compassion for others until you develop real compassion for yourself, including for the parts of yourself that you judge as unacceptable." She continued with specific instructions. "When irritation arises because someone makes noise during meditation, notice the irritation itself instead of immediately focusing on the person who triggered it. Notice what irritation actually feels like in your body. Where do you feel it? What are its qualities? Does it have a color, a texture, a temperature? Then, instead of judging yourself for feeling irritated, speak to that feeling as you might speak to a frightened child. You might say something like, 'I see you, irritation. I know you're here. You're trying to protect me from discomfort. Thank you for trying to help me. You don't need to fight so hard. I'm okay.'" Jiro was skeptical that talking to his emotions like this would accomplish anything, but he agreed to try the practice for a week. He had already tried everything else without success, so what did he have to lose? The first few days of this practice were quite uncomfortable. When irritation arose, Jiro's habit was immediately either to suppress it or act it out mentally through judgmental thoughts. Turning toward the irritation itself and meeting it with kindness felt strange and awkward. But gradually, he began to notice something interesting. When he stopped fighting the irritation and instead brought gentle attention to it, the feeling would often soften and sometimes dissolve on its own. It was as if the irritation had been intensified by his resistance to it, and when he stopped resisting, it naturally completed its cycle and moved on. He also began noticing what often lay beneath the surface irritation: fear of not being good enough, fatigue from trying so hard all the time, sadness about feeling disconnected from others. Once he stopped focusing exclusively on his judgments of other people and started paying attention to his own inner experience, he discovered a deep well of suffering in himself that he had been too busy criticizing to notice. This discovery cracked something open in Jiro's heart. He began to understand that his harsh judgments of others were intimately connected to the harsh way he treated himself. He expected himself to be perfectly patient and kind, and when he inevitably fell short of this impossible standard, he felt like a failure. This feeling of being a flawed, inadequate practitioner was so painful that he would quickly shift his attention away from it and on to external targets, focusing on others' faults so he didn't have to feel his own shame and sense of inadequacy. When he finally started bringing compassion to his own difficulty, to his own struggling, imperfect human experience, something unexpected happened. His relationship with other people's faults began to change organically, without effort. By the end of the week, when Jiro met with Etsuko again, he had much to report. He told her about discovering the pain beneath his irritation and about how treating his own difficult emotions with kindness had started to change his entire experience. The nun listened with obvious delight, nodding at key points in his story. "Now, I want you to take the practice one step further," she said. "You've discovered compassion for your own suffering. Now, when someone does something that triggers irritation in you, I want you to practice recognizing that they too are suffering in some way. The person who makes noise during meditation might be struggling with physical pain that makes sitting still difficult. The person who leaves spaces messy might be overwhelmed by depression or anxiety. The teacher who speaks slowly might be dealing with challenges you know nothing about."
This doesn't mean making excuses for inconsiderate behavior, Etsuko clarified. In practical terms, it can still be appropriate to ask someone to be quieter or cleaner. But the energy behind your request will be completely different if it comes from understanding rather than judgment. When you recognize that everyone is doing the best they can with the inner and outer resources they have at any given moment, even when their best falls short, you naturally respond with more kindness. This isn't something you have to force. It arises organically from seeing clearly. Jiro practiced this extended version of the teaching over the following months, and the transformation in his experience was profound. He discovered that what he had thought of as his unchangeable character flaw, his lack of natural kindness, was actually just an untrained pattern of relating to his own and others' suffering. As he learned to meet his own difficulties with compassion, his capacity for compassion toward others grew naturally, not as a forced performance, but as a genuine response to recognizing shared human struggle. Years later, Jiro became known as one of the kindest teachers in the monastery, someone who had a special gift for working with students who struggled with self-judgment and harshness. When these students would confess their lack of compassion, Jiro would smile with understanding and teach them the practice that had transformed his own heart, the practice of turning toward their difficulty with kindness rather than fighting it, of befriending their own suffering before trying to address anyone else's. This teaching reveals something essential about the Buddhist path to compassion. We often think of compassion as a quality we must develop toward others, and we try to force ourselves to be kinder, more patient, more loving. But this approach often backfires because it's built on a foundation of self-rejection, on the idea that who we naturally are is not good enough and must be fixed or improved. True compassion begins with acceptance and kindness toward our own experience, including the parts we judge as unspiritual or unworthy. When we stop waging war against our own hearts, when we bring the same gentle understanding to our own struggles that we want to offer others, we discover that compassion for all beings arises naturally. It's not something we create through effort, but something that emerges when we remove the barriers, primarily our harsh judgment of ourselves, that have been blocking its natural flow.
The deep rest that comes from this practice is the rest of finally being allowed to be human, to have difficult emotions and imperfect reactions without being condemned for them. When you can meet your own irritation, fear, sadness, or anger with the same kindness you would offer a dear friend, when you can recognize these difficult states as forms of suffering deserving of compassion rather than as character flaws requiring punishment, a great weight lifts. You discover that you are fundamentally acceptable exactly as you are. And from this foundation of self-acceptance, genuine transformation becomes possible.
Finding peace in impermanence.
In a village where the same families had lived for generations, there was a woman named Suzume who ran a small shop selling fabrics and supplies for sewing. The shop had been in her family for over 100 years, passed down from her great-grandmother to her grandmother, to her mother, and finally to her. Suzume had grown up playing among the bolts of cloth, learning the trade from her mother, and she had always assumed that someday she would pass the shop on to her own daughter. The shop was more than just her livelihood. It was her identity, her connection to her ancestors, her contribution to the community, and her legacy for the future. But when Suzume was in her early 50s, several things happened that disrupted her assumptions about how life would unfold. First, her daughter announced that she had no interest in taking over the shop. She had fallen in love with teaching and planned to move to the city to work at a university. Suzume felt hurt and disappointed, though she tried to support her daughter's choice. Then, a large modern store opened in a nearby town, selling fabrics at lower prices than Suzume could offer. Her customer base began to shrink as people discovered they could save money by shopping at the new store. The changes in the village economy and culture that had been gradual for years seemed to accelerate suddenly. Young people were moving away. Traditional crafts were declining. The world that Suzume had known and expected to continue was transforming in ways she hadn't anticipated and couldn't control. For several years, Suzume fought against these changes with increasing desperation. She tried to compete with the large store by offering special services and personal attention, but it wasn't enough to reverse the decline in sales. She tried to convince her daughter to reconsider her career choice, but succeeded only in creating tension in their relationship. She mourned the loss of the old ways and felt angry at the world for changing. Everything she had thought was permanent and reliable was proving to be temporary and uncertain. The shop that had existed for 100 years and that she had assumed would continue for another 100 might not survive another decade. Her role in an unbroken chain of tradition was breaking, and she didn't know how to accept this. The stress of these changes began to affect Suzume's health. She developed persistent headaches and stomach problems that doctors couldn't fully explain. She slept poorly, her mind churning with worries and regrets. She felt trapped between a past that was gone and a future she couldn't envision. One evening, as Suzume was closing the shop, feeling particularly despondent about the day's poor sales, an old customer named Iku came in just as Suzume was about to lock the door. Iku had been coming to the shop since before Suzume was born, and now, well into her 80s, she still occasionally needed fabric for small projects. Seeing Suzume's distress, Iku asked what was wrong. Suzume, exhausted from years of keeping appearances, let her guard down and poured out her heart. She told Iku about the failing business, the daughter who wouldn't carry on the tradition, the grief she felt about the ending of a 100-year legacy. "Everything is falling apart," Suzume said, trying not to cry. "Everything I thought was solid and permanent is proving to be just temporary. I don't know how to accept that all this will end, that the work my great-grandmother started might die with me." Iku listened with the deep patience of someone who had lived through many changes and losses. When Suzume finished, the old woman was quiet for a long moment, running her weathered hand over a bolt of indigo cloth with obvious affection. "Let me tell you what I see when I come into this shop," Iku said, finally. "I see your great-grandmother's hands in the way you measure and cut fabric, even though I never met her. I see your grandmother's kindness in the way you help customers choose what they need. I see your mother's attention to quality in the fabrics you stock. None of these things will disappear when the shop closes, if it closes. They live in you. They've influenced every person who ever learned from your family. Those influences ripple outward in ways you can't trace, but that are nonetheless real." Suzume wanted to find comfort in these words, but she still felt the grief of losing what had been such a central part of her life. But what about the shop itself? What about this space where all those generations worked? It feels like a death. Iku nodded slowly. "It is like a death, and death is sad. We should grieve it. But you know what I've learned in my 87 years? Everything that begins also ends. Every shop that opens will eventually close. Every business that starts will someday finish. Every tradition that begins will eventually transform or cease. This isn't a sign that something has gone wrong. It's simply how time works." The old woman gestured around the shop with its shelves of colorful fabrics and spools of thread catching the evening light. "This shop had a beautiful life. It has served this community for 100 years. That's wonderful, not tragic. The tragedy would be if you spent the shop's final years, however many that might be, so focused on grieving its eventual end that you couldn't appreciate its present existence." Something in Iku's words touched Suzume deeply. She realized that she had indeed been so fixated on the shop's mortality that she had stopped enjoying its life. She had stopped noticing the simple pleasures of working with beautiful fabrics, of helping customers with their projects, of sitting in a space where so much of her family's love and effort had been invested. She had been so busy fighting against impermanence that she had forgotten to actually live. Over the following weeks, Suzume made a conscious decision to change her relationship to the shop's uncertain future. Instead of constantly calculating how long it might last, she began to focus on appreciating each day that it still existed. When customers came in, she gave them her full attention, knowing that each interaction was precious rather than taking any of them for granted. When she worked with the fabrics, she felt gratitude for the beauty and texture beneath her hands, not worrying about how many more times she might get to do this work. This shift in perspective changed everything about her experience, even though the external circumstances remained challenging. The shop was still losing money. Her daughter still had no plans to take it over. The old ways were still fading. But Suzume was no longer suffering as intensely because she had stopped demanding that reality be different than it was. She had made peace with impermanence, not as an abstract concept, but as a lived truth. As this internal transformation deepened, Suzume also began to see new possibilities she had been too stressed to notice before. She started teaching sewing classes in the shop, sharing her family's knowledge with students who were interested in traditional crafts. These classes didn't bring in much money, but they created community and passed on skills in a new way. She began thinking about writing down her family's stories and the techniques her ancestors had developed, creating a record that would preserve something of their wisdom even if the shop itself didn't continue. Most importantly, she repaired her relationship with her daughter, letting go of her expectations and truly accepting her daughter's different path. This healing brought joy that Suzume hadn't experienced in years. She realized that she had been so attached to a particular form that her family's legacy should take that she had almost damaged the most important legacy of all, the loving relationship with her daughter. When her daughter visited from the city and saw the change in her mother, she said, "You seem so much more peaceful than when I left. What happened?" Suzume smiled. "I finally understood that trying to hold on to anything permanently is like trying to hold on to water. The tighter I grip, the more it slips through my fingers. But when I open my hand and let the water move naturally, I can still enjoy it while it's there without suffering about when it will leave." This teaching about impermanence is one of the foundational truths in Buddhism, and one of the most challenging for us to truly accept. Everything that exists is temporary. Everything that comes together will eventually come apart. Everything born will die. Every relationship will end through separation or death. Every experience, no matter how wonderful, will eventually conclude. Our natural response to this reality is often to try to pretend it's not true, to live as if the things and people we love will last forever, and then to feel shocked and betrayed when change inevitably comes. Or we become anxious, constantly worried about losing what we have, unable to enjoy the present because we're already grieving its future absence. But the Buddha taught a different way of relating to impermanence, not as an enemy to fight or a tragedy to mourn, but as a fundamental characteristic of existence that, when deeply understood, can actually enhance our appreciation of life rather than diminish it. When we truly grasp that everything is temporary, each moment becomes more precious rather than less. When we understand that everyone we love will eventually be gone, we have the opportunity to cherish them more fully while they're here. When we accept that nothing lasts forever, we can engage wholeheartedly with life as it is, rather than holding back out of fear of future loss. The peace that comes from accepting impermanence is profound and paradoxical. We might expect that truly confronting the temporary nature of everything would make us more anxious and sad, but in practice, it often brings tremendous relief. When we stop fighting against the fundamental nature of existence, when we stop demanding that things be permanent when permanence is impossible, we discover a freedom and ease that comes from aligning ourselves with reality as it is, rather than struggling against it.
This acceptance doesn't mean becoming passive or not caring about anything because it will all end anyway. Suzume didn't stop caring about her shop when she accepted its eventual closing. Instead, she cared more fully, more presently, with less anxiety and more appreciation. She engaged with her life and work with greater wholehearted presence precisely because she understood that her time was limited. This is the gift that impermanence offers when we stop resisting it. The motivation to show up fully for the life we have right now, rather than taking it for granted because we imagine we'll always have another chance tomorrow. As you rest here in this moment, feel into this teaching about impermanence. Every breath you take is unique and unrepeatable. This exact moment, with its particular quality of awareness and presence, will never come again. Everything is passing, including this very experience of listening to these words. When we truly feel this truth, rather than just thinking about it intellectually, it can bring a quality of poignancy and tenderness to every experience, a recognition that all of this, the beautiful and the difficult, the joyful and the sad, is precious precisely because it's temporary, precious precisely because it will change. The teaching of silence. High in the mountains, where snow covered the peaks for most of the year, there was a monastery known for its unusual practice. Unlike most Buddhist centers where teachers gave regular Dharma talks and students engaged in discussion of the teachings, this monastery observed almost complete silence. The monks and nuns who lived there communicated only when absolutely necessary for practical coordination, and even then used as few words as possible. The rest of the time, they maintained silence, both external and, as much as possible, internal. This practice had been established by the monastery's founder, a teacher named Hakuin, who had discovered something profound about the relationship between silence and truth. A young scholar named Akira, who had spent years studying Buddhist philosophy at a university, heard about this silent monastery and became intensely curious about it. He had read hundreds of texts about meditation and enlightenment, had debated fine points of doctrine with other scholars, and prided himself on his intellectual understanding of Buddhism. But despite all his knowledge, he felt something was missing. The teachings remained abstract concepts in his mind rather than lived truths in his experience. He wondered if spending time at this silent monastery might help him bridge the gap between his intellectual understanding and direct realization. Akira traveled for several days to reach the remote monastery, arriving as the sun was setting over the snow-covered mountains. A monk greeted him with a silent bow and showed him to a simple room where he could sleep. No one asked him why he had come or what he was seeking. No one gave him instructions or explained the schedule. He was simply expected to observe what others did and follow along. The next morning, Akira awoke to the sound of a bell and joined the other residents in the meditation hall. They sat in silence for an hour, then worked in silence for several hours, tending gardens and maintaining the buildings, then sat in silence again. This pattern continued throughout the day. Meals were eaten in silence. Walking was done in silence. Everything was silence. For the first few days, Akira found this extremely difficult. His mind, accustomed to constant mental activity, filled the external silence with an endless stream of internal chatter. He would sit in meditation, and his mind would race with thoughts about the practice, memories from his studies, plans for how he would describe this experience to colleagues back at the university. He found himself composing elaborate mental essays about silence while completely missing the actual experience of being silent. More frustrating was his inability to ask questions. Akira was used to learning through discussion and debate. When he didn't understand something, he would ask for clarification. When he encountered a difficult point, he would engage in dialogue to work through it. But here, there was no one to ask, no discussions to engage in, no explanations offered. He had to sit with his confusion and uncertainty without the relief of having someone answer his questions and resolve his doubts. After about a week of growing frustration, Akira requested a private meeting with Master Hakuin, the elderly teacher who led the monastery. Such meetings were rare and brief, granted only when a resident had something essential to communicate. When Akira was finally ushered into the master's simple room, he had planned a series of intelligent questions about the purpose of the silence practice, about how to quiet his racing mind, about what he should be trying to achieve. But when he sat down facing Hakuin, something about the master's presence made all his prepared questions evaporate. The old teacher sat in such complete silence, such absolute stillness, that it was like sitting across from a mountain or a lake. There was presence, but no agenda, awareness, but no grasping, attention, but no judgment. Akira opened his mouth to ask his first question, but found he couldn't speak. The quality of silence between them was so complete, so profound, that introducing words felt almost violent. They sat together in this wordless communion for perhaps 20 minutes, though Akira lost all sense of time. Finally, Master Hakuin spoke, his first words to Akira since his arrival. "What is the sound of silence?" Akira recognized this as a variation on the famous Zen koan about the sound of one hand clapping. He knew the traditional responses, had read scholarly analyses of what the koan was meant to teach, but the master held up a hand before Akira could offer his intellectual answers. "Don't tell me what you think. Don't give me words about silence. Show me silence itself." With that, the meeting was over. Akira returned to his room feeling confused and somewhat deflated. He had sought guidance and instead received a riddle. How could he show silence? Wasn't silence the absence of showing? But as he continued living in the monastery's quiet rhythms, something began to shift. Gradually, slowly, the constant mental chatter that had filled his mind started to settle, not because he was fighting it or trying to make it stop, but simply because there was nothing feeding it. Without conversations to replay, without new information to process, without anyone to impress or debate with, his thoughts began to run out of fuel. He started experiencing gaps between thoughts, moments of actual inner silence, rather than just the absence of external speech.
In these gaps, Akira began to notice things he had never paid attention to before. He noticed the quality of light changing throughout the day. He noticed the subtle sounds of wind and birds that he had been too mentally noisy to hear. He noticed the sensation of his own breathing with a clarity that had eluded him when his attention was caught up in concepts about breathing. He began to understand that all his years of studying Buddhist teachings had, in some ways, kept him at arm's length from direct experience. He had been collecting ideas about reality rather than actually meeting reality itself. After about a month, Akira experienced something that he had no words for, and even the attempt to capture it in memory seemed to diminish it. During morning meditation, his mind became completely still. Not the stillness of suppression or force, but the natural stillness of a pond on a windless day. In that stillness, there was no Akira observing meditation, no subject separate from object. There was just awareness itself, vast and open, containing everything without being limited by anything. The experience lasted only a few moments before his thinking mind returned, immediately trying to analyze what had happened, to capture it, to understand it. But those few moments changed everything. Akira now knew directly what all his books and studies had been pointing toward. The truth that can be spoken is not the eternal truth, as the Tao Te Ching says. The deepest realities cannot be conveyed through words because they transcend the conceptual framework that language requires. They can only be experienced directly in the silence beyond thought. Akira remained at the monastery for another year, not studying or accumulating new knowledge, but gradually learning to rest more and more consistently in the direct awareness he had glimpsed. When he finally prepared to leave and return to the world, he requested one last meeting with Master Hakuin. The old teacher received him with the same quality of silent presence that had struck Akira so powerfully on his first visit. But now Akira could meet that presence with his own silence, and they sat together in wordless understanding. Finally, Akira spoke. "Master, when I arrived here, I knew so much about Buddhism. Now I feel like I know almost nothing, and yet I understand more than I ever did." Hakuin smiled. "Then your time here has been well spent. The beginning of wisdom is understanding how little words can convey. What have you learned?" Akira was quiet for a long time before responding. "I've learned that silence is not just the absence of sound, it's the presence of something deeper than sound can express. I've learned that my thoughts are not reality itself, but just my mind's commentary about reality. I've learned that the truth I was seeking through all my studies was never in the books. It was always here, in the direct experience of this moment, but I was too busy thinking about it to notice it." The master nodded. "And what will you do with this understanding when you return to the world of noise and words?" That question had been troubling Akira. He worried that leaving the monastery's protected silence would mean losing the clarity he had found. But as he sat with Hakuin's question, he realized something. "I can't live in external silence forever. That would be escaping from life rather than engaging with it. But I can carry the inner silence with me. I can speak and interact with the world while remaining rooted in the silence beneath all words." Hakuin smiled more broadly. "Now you understand the true practice. Silence is not about rejecting words or avoiding the world. It's about discovering the ground of awareness that exists before and beneath all our thinking and talking. From that ground, we can engage with life fully, using words when they're useful, but never mistaking them for the reality they attempt to describe." When Akira returned to the university, his colleagues noticed a profound change in him. His lectures, while still knowledgeable, now came from a different place. Instead of displaying his learning, he spoke only what was useful. Instead of engaging in academic debates to prove points, he listened deeply and offered insights that came from silence rather than from more thinking. Students found his classes transformative because Akira had learned to point beyond words toward direct experience. He would sometimes stop mid-lecture and have everyone simply sit in silence for a few minutes, letting the conceptual understanding settle into something deeper. This teaching about silence reveals something essential about the limitations of language and conceptual thinking. Words are incredibly useful tools. They allow us to communicate, to share knowledge, to plan and coordinate, but they can also become barriers when we mistake the map for the territory. When we think that understanding words about truth means we understand truth itself. The deepest peace that Buddhist teachings offer cannot be adequately conveyed through words, including these words you're hearing right now. Words can point the way, like a finger pointing at the moon, but if we focus all our attention on the finger, we miss the moon entirely. There's a place of profound rest that exists beneath all our thinking and talking, beneath all our concepts and beliefs, beneath even our sense of being a separate self who is trying to understand and achieve peace. This ground of silence, of pure awareness, is always present, always accessible, but we rarely notice it because we're so busy with the surface activities of the mind. As you rest here now, see if you can notice the silence that holds these words. Not the absence of sound, but the awareness within which all sounds arise and fade. That awareness, that silent presence is closer to your true nature than any words could express. When you touch that silence, even briefly, you taste the peace that's always been here waiting for you to quiet down enough to notice it.
Integration and deep rest. In a fishing village where the rhythms of life followed the tides and seasons, there lived an elderly woman named Hana who was known throughout the region for her remarkable peace. People would observe her going about her daily tasks, mending nets, preparing fish, tending her small garden, and they would sense something different about her presence. She moved through life with an ease and grace that seemed effortless, as if she were dancing rather than working, as if she had discovered some secret about existence that allowed her to be fully engaged yet completely at ease. Young people would sometimes ask her, "Grandmother Hana, what is the secret to your peaceful way of being?" And she would always respond with variations of the same simple answer. "There is no secret. I just pay attention to what I'm doing and try not to carry yesterday's troubles into today or borrow tomorrow's worries to burden this moment." But one young woman named Miku, who had recently lost her parents and was struggling with grief and uncertainty about her future, was not satisfied with this simple answer. She approached Hana one evening and said with some frustration, "Grandmother, I respect your wisdom, but I need more than platitudes. My heart is breaking. My future is uncertain. How can I possibly be at peace when everything feels so difficult?" Hana looked at Miku with deep compassion and invited her to sit on the porch overlooking the ocean. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. "Tell me what you're struggling with most," Hana said gently. Miku poured out her heart, describing the pain of losing her parents, the loneliness she felt, the anxiety about how she would support herself, the anger at life for being so hard, the fear that she would never feel okay again. Hana listened without interrupting, giving Miku space to express everything she was carrying. When Miku finally fell silent, exhausted from her outpouring of grief, Hana spoke quietly. "Everything you're feeling makes perfect sense. Loss hurts. Uncertainty is frightening. Your heart has every right to break over losing your parents. There's nothing wrong with what you're feeling." Miku looked surprised. "I thought you would tell me I need to accept everything and let go and find peace despite my circumstances." Hana shook her head. "That kind of teaching is often misunderstood. Acceptance doesn't mean pretending you're not in pain.
It doesn't mean forcing yourself to be okay with things that hurt. It means allowing yourself to feel what you actually feel without adding the second layer of suffering that comes from judging yourself for feeling it. The old woman pointed to the ocean before them, where waves were rolling in with steady rhythm. Look at those waves. Some are small and gentle. Some are large and powerful. The ocean doesn't resist any of them. It allows each wave to be exactly what it is, and because it doesn't resist, the ocean remains at peace even while waves rise and fall on its surface. Hana turned to look directly at Miku. Your grief is like a large wave. It's powerful and painful, but you are like the ocean, not like the wave. The grief is moving through you, but it's not all of you. If you can learn to be the spacious awareness that holds the grief rather than being completely identified with it, you'll find that you can feel the pain without being destroyed by it. Miku tried to understand what Hana was pointing toward, but it still seemed abstract. How do I do that? How do I be the ocean and not the wave? Hana stood up slowly, her movements deliberate despite her age. Let's do something practical. Come help me prepare vegetables for tomorrow's soup. Miku felt confused. She had poured out her heart about profound suffering, and the old woman wanted to prepare vegetables. But she had learned to trust Hana's unconventional teaching methods, so she followed her into the kitchen. Hana handed Miku a knife and a cutting board and set a basket of vegetables between them. Now, Hana instructed, as we prepare these vegetables, I want you to give your complete attention to the task. Feel the texture of the vegetable in your hand. Notice the resistance and then the yielding as the knife cuts through. Pay attention to the smell, the colors, the sounds. And whenever you notice your mind wandering into thoughts about your grief or your future, gently bring your attention back to the simple task in front of you. They worked together in silence for a few minutes, and Miku found that following Hana's instructions created an unexpected relief. When her attention was completely absorbed in the immediate task, there was a brief respite from the churning thoughts and painful emotions that usually dominated her awareness. After a while, Hana spoke softly. Everything you're experiencing right now is the essence of practice. You're learning to rest in simple present moment awareness rather than being completely lost in the story your mind tells about your life. The grief is still there. Nothing about your circumstances has changed. But for these moments, you're not adding extra suffering by dwelling in painful thoughts about the past or fearful thoughts about the future. Miku began to understand. So, peace doesn't mean the waves stop coming. It means learning to rest in the deeper part of myself that remains still even while the waves are moving. Hana smiled. Yes, and this isn't something you achieve once and then have forever. It's a practice you engage with moment by moment, returning again and again to this direct experience of just being here, doing what you're doing, feeling what you're feeling without the extra layer of mental struggle against reality. Over the following weeks, Miku spent more time with Hana, learning not through lectures or explanations, but through the practice of bringing complete attention to simple tasks. They would mend nets together, and Hana would teach Miku to give her full awareness to each knot she tied. They would walk on the beach, and Hana would point out how the practice of feeling each footstep, each breath of ocean air could anchor awareness in the present moment, even while difficult emotions were present in the background. Gradually, Miku discovered that all the teachings she had heard about over the years, acceptance, letting go of what we cannot control, compassion for ourselves and others, mindfulness of the present moment, simplicity beneath complexity, non-striving that allows life to unfold naturally, appreciation for impermanence that makes each moment precious, and the silence that exists beneath all our words and thoughts. These are not separate practices to master one by one.
They are different doorways into the same fundamental recognition. You are not your thoughts. You are the awareness that knows thoughts. You are not your emotions. You are the space in which emotions arise and pass. You are not your circumstances. You are the consciousness that experiences circumstances without being defined or limited by them. This recognition, this shift from being the waves to being the ocean, is what the Buddhist teachings have been pointing toward for over 2,000 years. And it's available to you right now, not as a future achievement, but as a present reality you can recognize and rest in. As you settle even more deeply into relaxation now, feel how all these teachings integrate into a simple invitation to be here, fully present for the miracle of this moment, fully accepting of whatever this moment contains, fully open to the vast awareness that is your deepest nature. The return to original nature.
There's an ancient Zen teaching that says, "Before I began practicing, mountains were mountains and rivers were rivers. When I began practicing, mountains were no longer mountains and rivers were no longer rivers. After years of practice, mountains are again mountains and rivers are again rivers." This teaching points toward the journey we all take from innocent simplicity through necessary complexity back to conscious simplicity. We start our lives with a natural wholeness and unself-conscious presence that children often embody. Then we enter the world of concepts and conditioning, learning to see ourselves and everything around us through increasingly complex filters of thought and belief. This complexity is necessary for navigating the human world, but it also distances us from direct experience. The spiritual path is not about returning to childish innocence, but about recovering that direct connection to life while maintaining the wisdom and discernment that maturity brings. All of the stories and teachings you've received tonight have been invitations back to your original nature, the pure awareness that existed before you learned to complicate it with endless thinking. This original nature is sometimes called Buddha nature, sometimes called true self, sometimes called the ground of being. The words we use to point toward it matter less than the direct recognition of it. And that direct recognition is available right now in the simple fact of your own awareness. Notice that you are aware right now. You are aware of these words, of your breathing, of sensations in your body, of the space around you. This awareness, this knowing presence, is not something you do, it's what you are. It doesn't come and go like thoughts and feelings. It's the constant background against which all your experiences unfold. This awareness doesn't judge you. It doesn't tell you you should be different or better. It simply receives whatever arises with perfect acceptance. When you rest as this awareness, rather than being lost in the content it's aware of, you discover the peace that has always been here, underneath all your seeking and struggling. This is your original nature, and it's also your destination. The journey is a circle that brings you home to where you've always been. As you rest in this recognition, you might notice that the various practices and teachings begin to seem less like things you need to do and more like reminders of what you already are. You don't need to create acceptance. Awareness is already accepting of whatever it's aware of. You don't need to force compassion. Your deepest nature is naturally responsive to suffering. You don't need to achieve presence. Awareness is always present, always now. All the effort, all the striving, all the trying to become more spiritual or peaceful or enlightened, these are just the mind's ways of avoiding the simple recognition that you are already what you seek. This is the great secret hidden in plain sight. The Buddha you're trying to become is the Buddha you already are. The peace you're seeking is the peace that's seeking through you. The awareness that's reading these words is not different from the awareness that was present when the Buddha sat beneath the Bodhi tree, or when Jesus prayed in the garden, or when any sage throughout history touched the truth of their being. Names and forms differ, but awareness itself, pure consciousness, is universal and timeless. You are that. You have always been that. You will always be that. Nothing you do or fail to do can create it or destroy it. Your job, if there is one, is simply to recognize what's already true and stop overlooking it while you search for something more impressive or exotic. As this long night draws toward its close and your body and mind settle into the deepest rest, let all the teachings dissolve back into the simple truth they've been pointing toward. You are the ocean, vast and accepting, letting waves of experience rise and fall on your surface while your depths remain undisturbed. You are the sky, spacious and open, letting clouds of thought and emotion drift through without being defined by any of them. You are awareness itself, the light of consciousness in which the entire dance of life unfolds. Rest here. Rest as this. This is your true home, and you have never actually left it. All your seeking has been the journey from your head to your heart, from complexity to simplicity, from becoming to being. And now, at last, you can rest. And so we come to the end of our journey together. Though in truth, there is no end, only a return to the beginning, to the simple presence that has been here all along. You have traveled through ancient stories and timeless wisdom, and you have arrived exactly where you started, but with new eyes, with deeper understanding, with a heart more open to the peace that has always been your birthright. As you drift now into sleep, carry with you this recognition. You are enough exactly as you are. Your life is perfect for your awakening exactly as it is. This moment is complete in itself, requiring nothing to be added, nothing to be taken away. The peace you've touched through these teachings is not something you need to maintain through effort. It's your natural state, always available when you stop complicating it with struggle. Let your breathing carry you deeper now. Each exhalation a letting go, each inhalation a gentle receiving. Your body knows how to rest. Your mind knows how to be still. Trust the ancient wisdom that lives in your cells, older than thought, deeper than worry. You are held by the same awareness that holds all things. You are home in the vast heart of being. Sleep comes like a friend now, gentle and welcome, carrying you into the formless awareness that is your deepest truth. There is nothing more you need to do, nowhere else you need to be, nothing you need to figure out or solve or fix. Simply let go completely, and trust that you are being carried by something infinitely larger and wiser than your individual concerns. May you sleep deeply and wake gently. May you carry the peace you've touched tonight into tomorrow's activities. May you remember, when life becomes difficult again, that the ocean of awareness is always here, always accepting, always at peace beneath the surface waves. Thank you for walking this path with Mindful Temple tonight. May all beings find peace. May all hearts rest in their true nature. May all suffering beings be free. Sweet dreams, dear friend. The peace you seek is already seeking you. And in the deepest sleep, in the space between thoughts, in the vast silence of pure being, you will find it waiting, patient and eternal, for your recognition. If this journey brought you peace tonight, please leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments below. to help our community grow. And consider subscribing to our channel. Good night.